Greetings! Welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we are building off of a recent video in which we made these three lovely stone planters. We have purchased and collected from my own yard. None of this is from any sort of sensitive environment, but some lovely drought-tolerant and alpine plants, and we're going to stick them in these planters. Now, for a set of reasons that we'll talk about as we go through, this is sort of a special case planting. We're going to do some things different than you normally would, just chucking plants in a pot. So if you're interested in that, let's dig in. Come join. Now, part of the reason that this is such a special case is the geometry of the pots that we made. I'll make sure that I put a link at the top of the screen to the video where we make those pots. But short of the long, in a normal pot, the drainage holes are in the bottom and the water goes down through and straight out, right? So that facilitates the ability of gravity to move the water down and out and maintain the water-oxygen balance in your soil. Because ours are draining horizontally, that's going to be a slower process. That makes drainage even more important, okay? I recently did a video on the channel about how water interacts with different shapes of pots. I will make sure to put a link to that in the end screen to this video. But short of the long, drainage is super important. At the same time, we can't lose track of the fact that our soil needs to support plant growth, root development, microorganism growth, because the soil needs beneficial microorganisms, and it needs cationic exchange capacity to hold its nutrients. Okay? So we can't just grow things in sand, right? Or we'll have not enough water retention and none of those other functions. So the mix that I'm going to make is a balance of those things. So we're going to start with this compost. This is just finished compost. This is about 5-year-old horse manure, about what this is. Okay? It's going to be about half of our soil. The next thing is sort of a special ingredient that you probably haven't seen or thought of before. This is granular diatomaceous earth. Can they see in the bucket, beloved? Okay. This is granular diatomaceous earth. Okay? This is a product that is sold for drying up oil spills. Okay, because it's really good at grabbing and holding that oil. It has a high porosity, high water retention value, and some cation exchange capacity, okay, which will help it hold the inorganic nutrients and make them available to our plants, right? I pre-wet this, and you can see it's still fairly wet. It's holding on to quite a bit of moisture. So this will provide drainage, but will provide drainage in a way that has other benefits that you won't get with sand or you won't get just with a perlite or vermiculite type product. Okay? So we're going to mix those two together, about even Steven. When you're looking for this, there's a bunch of different brands that it comes under. Some for like drying up oil spills, like I mentioned, others for agricultural use. It's all the same stuff. You do want to make sure it's granular, and you want to make sure it's not fired. If you fire it, you lose the cation exchange capacity. You also want to make sure you're not buying a fired clay. So like Turfus and several other oil absorbents are like a fired clay material. That won't do the same thing. You don't want those. This is the second thing you can use for this would be Japanese akadama, but that's not really available here in North America. So this is instead of that. It's also a whole lot cheaper. Now, we want a couple other things to there. One thing is we want some of those beneficial soil microorganisms. So I'm mixing in a little bit of just garden and forest floor soil. Okay, this is sort of an inoculant more than anything. We want a little bit of non-decomposed organic matter for those fungi microorganisms to act on. So I'm just going to add a handful of bark. Okay, not a whole lot, just some pine bark. That'll give some of those fungi just a substrate that they can attach to. And as the plants grow and shed roots and grow and shed roots over and over again, this will be replaced naturally. We'll give it a little bit there to start out. And we need some fertilizer. So this is some sawdust to which my chickens have added some fertilizer. So again, I don't want a whole lot of this, but we'll put a little bit of that in there. We'll mix this all up. And that will be our soil mix. Now, I'm going to look at these two pots first. And the order at which we do things is going to be really important here, because I want sort of a planted wall look. So these drainage holes right here in this one, and then here and here in this one, I'm going to poke a couple of little plants into. Okay? And this has to be done first because this is right on the lowest level of the planter. So I'm going to just find myself a little pokey stick. Definitely going to need a little pokey stick. Can be anything. Not high tech. And my little plants, which I just separated out and then set down somewhere. Okay. So this one, I'm going to put a little sedge going through and then coming up on the outside of this little planter. So which way is best to go in? Probably this way. Just going to feed the roots in. This is where you need a little help from the pokey stick. A pretty tight squeeze there. Yep, there we go. Now this is going to look kind of funny right when it's planted, but as this grows out, these will come up and extend here in the future. Okay? Just want that so the crown is just at the edge, and those roots are kind of situated in there. Good. Now, over here, I'm going to use a couple of little violets. So, same deal. And right here, on the edge. A little pokey stick assistance. Get those roots tucked up in there. Okay, I need a smoother pokey stick. That's pulling it out faster than it's putting it in. Now, the difficulty of planting this, the way that I'm working things in like this, is the second special consideration for the soil, because I need a soil that will not collapse and will keep these plants going for a good long time. Because while I can take this apart and replant it, and over time I will have to take this apart and replant it, that is not something I want to be doing every year, right? So I expect this to have the capacity to last for several years, which means if I was to use a 100% organic growing medium, that just wouldn't happen. Okay. Going at the wrong angle. Trying to be as gentle as I can. There we go. Okay. I'll pull it back out. The crown is just in the right spot and these roots are sticking out in. Like that. With a couple violets in again, they will grow up. Now, some plants in the way here. Again, gravity is going to take the water down and it's going to want to coat this surface. And since this stone is quite absorbent, beloved, could you hand me my trowel? I left it over there. Since the stone is quite absorbent, it's going to hold a lot of water just in that contact area. So I want a drainage layer that is not absorbent at all. Okay. So it only needs to be one particle thick, but I'm using perlite. lightweight, very little ability to absorb any moisture, and it's just going to provide an easy drainage layer so the water that comes down can easily go out to either side there. Can you give me a bucket right there? We're going to do this on both. Thank you, beloved. Okay. We're going to do this on both of these pots. Just one layer thick of this perlite. And then one layer thick of this pre-wetted granular diatomaceous earth, which will hold quite a bit more water than that perlite, will still have very good drainage. Okay? I'm going to get this settled. We'll come back when I have some plants ready to go in. Okay, so we're back from our little intermission. We had a couple of critters get out. We had to go bait back in with the promise of grain. Anyhow, we're ready to go for the next stage. We have our drainage layer in, and I took a little bit of the extra diatomaceous earth and poked it in the corners here in these little drainage holes. That will allow water out very nicely, but still give the roots something that they can work with. One note here, notice I pre-wet this. It will absorb a lot of water, so you want to give it that before you make your mix. But even more importantly, diatomaceous earth dust is horrible for your lungs. Utterly horrible. Big silicosis risk. It'll give you a white lung like crazy. So you want to keep it wet when you're working with it to keep the dust down. But we're done working with that in its pure form. Now we're going to start planting. This one, I'm going to start with this little piece of sedge. Okay. And I'm just going to go along and put it where I want it, and then tuck some of the soil mixture in around. This isn't too fussy a process. Okay. Kind of tuck it in, pack it in, give it a little height. We're imitating a natural high elevation rock crevice mixture of plants, so there's always some sort of grass or sedge around. And these little sedges are a bit better behaved than most grasses are. They're not going to take over your small pot quite as quickly. Okay. Pack all this in there. Now in front of this, I'm going to put some of these little saxifrags. This is the mossy saxifrag. This is a European species. And it's kind of a hybrid of two different species. I'm going to put two reds and a white in here. There's all sorts of different mixes. They naturally hybridize very easily. But they'll make a nice mat of foliage, a nice rounded, mossy looking mat of foliage, and have really pretty flowers on them to boot.
And they're really cute.
They are really cute. I have a soft spot for saxifrags. They're worldwide in distribution, the genus is. Obviously not every species is. But you'll find these things growing up in little rock ledges. You can be on a solid mound of granite, find a little crack that's barely big enough to hold a clump of moss, but sure enough there's a clump of moss sitting there and a saxifrag growing in it. They're just fascinating plants. Bring up the soil mix there. Okay. That one's finished, and these will spread out and expand and cover this whole soil, and even back around the grass, and then you'll have little grass poking out. It'll take a little bit of time for that to mature, as it always does with a planting. And then as these violets establish and grow up, you'll have them in the corners. So have a little bit of diversity there in that little corner. Very nice. Okay. Now we'll go on to the second one. This one I did the grass as the living wall style planting. And there's a second little hole here, if I can find it. Oh yeah, right there it is. Okay, that I'm going to tuck another little violet in. But first we're going to start with this coral bells. This is a relative of the saxifrages. It's also a high elevation plant, this one from Arizona. Most of the Hucharias are lowland plants, but this is an exception. A very beautiful one. Desert mountain alpine plant.
Which makes it a good choice for this application.
Yeah, very drought resistant. It'll do well here. Could probably split that clump if I really wanted to. Okay. Now we're getting to where I want to put the second living wall plant in. Move this guy over. It's going to be another violet. And knock a little more dirt off of them. I would rather not bare root these quite as much as I am. I've got to get them in the little holes. This one's not going to go that way. See if I can feed his leaves through. Yeah, that'll work. Little beat up. Definitely going to take some bruising from that.
It'll come back from
But
it.
it will recover. Okay. Now its roots are right there horizontal. And I'm going to put a little bit of my soil mix on top of them. We're going to put another little sedge in here. Soil mix around that. And then for a ground cover that'll spread all over this one, this is called Pussy Toes. Tuck it in that way. These are a rhizome plant, so it'll spread out. You're going to look a little bit of little clumpy here to start with, but that'll resolve with time. Okay. So that one is planted. Give them a good drink. Wash off the stones. You can see it running out the side holes.
Mm-hmm.
Working as designed. There you go. Those two are done. Now I'm going to get set up for this third planter and we'll rejoin then. So this one we have a little bit more space to work with and we're going to put a little bit more structure into it. So I've already put down the drainage layers, same as the first two. I've put these little living wall plantings in here. Again, they'll stick up as they grow forward. You know, they'll look funny for here the first year, but next year they'll come up and come straight up like you would expect them to. So we're going to start with plants here. First we have this little dwarf baby's breath. And this is from another really interesting. This is the pinks, Caryophyllaceae. Okay. And again, we have a lot of really nice, fun alpine plants in this group. And I need my soil. Pack some of this around here, just like we did before. Need a bit more soil. Go. You got to get it in everywhere like this. Trying to split this into a couple of pieces and kind of messed it up a little, but it'll come back just fine. There we go. Now I want a little piece of sedge in here. Set that right there. Some dirt in around it. Okay. Now I want to add a little bit of structure to this. And I want to be careful that I establish the structure with something that won't slump at all. So this crevice I'm going to fill with this diatomaceous earth material. So that's going to stay right where I put it. It won't decompose and slump down. But it will still have at least some water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity for the plant roots. Okay? Now, I'm going to add another stone to this. Nestle that in right there. And this is what I don't want to slump down. Pack a little bit of the soil in on top of it. Nestle it in around the diatomaceous earth there. Okay. Now, I'm going to put a bunch of soil in here. I'm going to crawl up this stone a little bit. Need a little more. That'll just add a little bit more structure and asymmetry within the planting. Now, right on top of that, I'm going to put this little creeping thyme. You always wanted, when you have a root-bound plant like this, you always want to disturb the roots a little bit. Just kind of pull the corners out of it. Tuck this guy in right there. Just kind of mush them in a little bit. And then, the red, we're going to mix together some more of these red and white saxifrages. Hand me the one with 3 in it there. Kind of disturb the roots a little bit again. And here across this flat, I kind of open this clump up a little bit. Change the root shape so I can set them just like that. Okay, one of the whites. Oh, thank you. Going to do the same thing, pull the corners out of the root ball and just massage it open a little. That one right in there, like so. One more piece. Now this one I'm not going to muss up quite so much. Just pack him right in that corner. Some soil around him. Kind of layer these in. This will make a nice moss hump. These mossy saxifrages. One. And 2. That'll do it. Okay. Make sure I pack a little soil in against the roots of that little living wall planting right there. So I'm going through. And some handfuls of dirt. finish it off. Okay. I'm going to finish tucking these in, clean up the area a little bit, and I'll show you the finished thing. So there you go, 3 little Alpine planters. Now, as these go forward, right, remember these plants that I did in the living wall configuration, they're coming out straight now, but they will turn up some this year and grow up normally next year. And these planters are intended to be fairly permanent, right? This is not something they can easily take apart and replant on a regular basis. So, there you go. Last thought on this is, do bear in mind that you don't just have to do ornamentals with this kind of thing. You could take strawberries and you could do larger ones in a permanent location that you're not going to want to move them around, and put your strawberry garden in there. You can do things like a dwarf aronia. Okay, like Aronia lowscape mound is a dwarf aronia that's only going to get about this tall and would be totally appropriate for a larger version of this. There's medicinal alpines, right? Like arnica is a medicinal alpine plant that you could have in a planter like this. So I'm doing this as a demonstration to house some of these lovely little alpines, but use this as food for thought and think about how it would fit into your ornamental and permacultural design ideas, right? Think beyond just what I'm doing. Think of this as an idea starter. I could envision a large wall with planters that, instead of having 3 on this little stone bench being walled off in one large planter. And then full of, an aronia and an arnica and a bunch of strawberries around for the ground cover, right? Maybe some sweetgrass coming up for more medicinals in there, So there's a lot you could do with this. Think outside the box when you're creating your own little boxes. So, if you've enjoyed this, I would be most grateful if you gave it a thumbs up. I mean, look at this beautiful plant. How can you not want to give it a thumbs up? And when you do, the algorithm knows that you enjoyed it and will show it to others. And I'm always grateful for that. Thank you so much. And I hope that you will join us next time here at Old Ways Rising Farm for more fun projects. Till then, have a blessed day.